Hey everybody! Today I wanted to talk about how to self-learn economics. And this video is really inspired by this mammoth of a book called The Economics for a Changing World by the Core Team. And this book is a textbook for economics, essentially a University 101 type course that you can take. And the material is really good. And essentially in this book they go through all of the central concepts of economics, from production functions to isocost lines to how the government makes fiscal policy, to how banks work, to how sustainable economic policy may be formulated and things like that. So this is a really thick book and it's full of knowledge and stuff that's really useful for understanding economics. And so in this video I wanted to just discuss a bit about how I'm going about self-learning this mammoth of a book, and I wanted to give you some tips about how you may go about self-educating yourself to economics if you don't have a degree in economics. The first thing I want to highlight is just to be curious. I think all learning is about being curious, and especially in economics, since the material may be really heavy at some points, it's really important to have your curiosity drive you to keep learning the material. And this curiosity, if you have it, great. If you don't, I think you can work on it. And the way that you work on it is just sort of noticing what happens in the world around you at a macro scale, so at government, fiscal policy, what the Fed does, for example, in the US, how crypto evolves. If you're not interested in these things, naturally, economics probably isn't for you. But if you have curiosity in these areas, I think it's really easy to apply that same curiosity to learning something academic as Economics 101 type material. The second thing is to ask the right questions. And this comes down to sort of my thought about why I think going into university straight after college is questionable, to say the least. And I think the issue is that when people go from college straight to university, they don't have the right questions. So they aren't asking the right questions and they're given the answers. So in that way, the sort of answers don't stay in their head because they don't have the sort of question slot in their memory to which the sort of answer would be slotted into. So asking the right questions about the world and about economics, I think is really important. And the right questions, it's really important to describe to you what the right questions are, because the right questions are different for everybody, I think. And the way you might go about discovering if you have the right questions in your head is to see if you're actually curious about economics. So for example, I want to get a well-paying job, and that's why I want to learn this economic material. I don't think that's a very good motivator to learn, especially self-educate yourself to something as difficult and complicated as economics. So if you have this sort of external motivation, I think it's quite difficult to keep with the study habits. So finding the right question really comes down to whether your motivation is external or internal. If it's internal, then you're a lot more likely to ask the right questions and actually remember the material once you're given answers to the questions that you're asking. The third thing is to think about the actual real world. So in the world around us, there happens economic things all the time. So the Fed might announce a raise in interest rates. The British central bank might do the same. And then these have different consequences that economic analysts talk about, and following that sort of analysis is difficult without having the context of the proper economic terms. So for example, that's a real world scenario where economic material is helpful, and that's also where you can to go to the next step is where you can apply the knowledge. So when you learn something like this that's often very abstract, it's easy to sort of stay in the abstract level of analysis. I think Jordan Peterson formulated this idea very well, where you have different levels of analysis whenever you look at something. So whenever you look at a computer, you of course don't think about the zeros and ones, that's way too detailed of a level of analysis. Rather, you think about the GUI, or the graphic user interface, which is a completely different level of analysis than thinking about the zeros and ones. So the same applies here, where thinking about these concepts is sort of the zeros and ones of economics, and actually applying them to the real world, if you want to think about it this way, is the GUI. So if it's a higher or a more lower level of analysis depends on how you think about it. So if it's a higher resolution or a lower resolution form of analysis, I think it's a lower resolution or form of analysis, but that really doesn't matter. The point is that you have to have this abstract level of thinking, and then you have to have this concrete level of thinking to actually learn the knowledge and learn how to use it as well. So I think a sign that you've learned a material well is a situation where you can explain the material on a theoretical level. So if somebody asks you what's an Isocos curve, or what's an Isocos line rather, you can answer that question. And if somebody in the newspaper is doing some sort of analysis about Isocos lines, you can follow that as well and think about how that applies to the real world and the choices different companies are making. So these were some of my ideas on how to self-learn economics, or really any subject. And if you find this video valuable, I hope you consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.